Senator John McCain set a record as the most frequent guest on Face the Nation. McCain joined the program 112 times, making most of those appearances with Bob Schieffer. And Bob Schieffer joins me now. He's the former moderator of Face the Nation and current CBS News contributor. Thank you so much for joining us. You were friends with McCain. You visited him in these last few months when he was being treated for cancer at his home in Sedona.
I did, and it was a visit I'll never forget.
Yeah.
You know, it was a beautiful day out there, and that house it backs up to a creek that runs through, and there's these oak trees, and there's a breeze in the air, and it was such a peaceful. It was almost like a spiritual experience, as it were. I don't want to get too far down that road, but. You know, I hadn't seen him in a while, and it was the day after the Annapolis graduation ceremonies where Trump had spoken. Mm-hmm. And there had been a lot of talk about the cadets might stand and turn their backs on Trump, or they might demonstrate in some way. And I said, how was the graduation ceremony? And he said, I was just so proud of them. He said, I was so proud of them. Mm-hmm. Because he understood the presidency, that things like that are about the presidency. They're not about the person who happens to be president at that time. And I just thought to myself, this is what John McCain is all about. And when they talk about honor, he was an honorable man in every sense of the word. He was also one of the toughest characters I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he fought this disease the same way he fought every battle of his life, and he fought it until the very end. He never gave up. He never, to my knowledge, and any time I ever talked to him in public or private, ever said, "Why me, Lord?" or something like that. He lived life to the fullest, and he went down fighting.
You know, in the current political climate, in the climate of partisanship and I'll say lack of civility, he certainly seems very unique. But I wonder if he had always seemed that way. Was he always sort of made of different stuff?
You know, he was truly maverick. I mean, he charted his own course. And John McCain was never worried about who was standing beside him. He wanted to make sure he was standing for what he thought was right. And if other people wanted to join him, that was fine. And if they didn't, that was fine too. Yeah. He never compromised on his principles. He was someone who understood what so few in politics understand now, that you can have differences of opinion without challenging someone's principles and what they stand for. Ted Kennedy, as partisan a senator as there was on the Democratic side, loved John McCain, and he loved to debate John McCain, but they loved each other. They were great friends. I mean, McCain told me once about coming off the Senate floor after they'd had a knockdown, drag out, and he said Senator Kennedy put his arm around him as they walked back into the cloakroom and said, "Well, boy, we really put on one for him then, didn't we?" And they got a kick out of it. Right. But Senator McCain had great respect for those he dealt with. That's why he was such a good guest to have. He understood what my job was, and he expected me to understand what his job was. His job, as it is for politicians, was to deliver a message. It was my job to check it out and find out if it was true. Well, he understood that, and it didn't bother him one bit. And that's why I've always said the reason I liked him so much is that, unlike so many politicians, you could always find him. You know, most of them,
camera shy.
And I'm not saying they're not good people or something like that. Many of them, if the news is good about them, they're delighted to talk to you. If the news is bad, you can't find them with a bloodhound. Right. You know, you could always find John McCain, and he was always there to answer the question. You might not like the answer he gave, but he would give you an answer.
You talked about his friendship with Senator Kennedy, and there are other sort of robust friendships that we know of. Flake, Lindsey Graham, of course, but also he wanted Joe Lieberman to be his vice president.
Well, exactly.
Right? That's so stunning to me. And I thought to myself, you know, here's a guy who was not just bipartisan, sort of in terms of what looked good in front of the cameras, but he genuinely liked the people that he worked with. And
he liked Joe Lieberman for what he stood for, for his principles, for who he was. He didn't care if he was a Democrat. That didn't bother him at all. And what happened at that convention, he really wanted to put Lieberman on the ticket. And his advisors came to him and said they'll walk out of this convention. They might not even certify you as the Republican. And basically, I'm not quoting him, but basically what he said, okay, you go find me someone. And someone brought up the name of Sarah Palin, who hadn't been vetted in the traditional way. But you never, ever heard John McCain criticize her.
Really?
You know, in the end, when he wrote his last book, he revealed, I mean, I knew about it and others knew about it, that he had wanted to put Lieberman on the ticket and, you know, but he never, ever criticized her either in a personal way, or never did he blame her for having anything to do with his defeat. He said, that's my responsibility. I'm the reason, you know.
Many have said that choosing her as the vice presidential candidate helped to usher in this era of bipartisanship that he railed against so passionately, that he, in the middle of his treatments after receiving brain surgery, returned to Washington not only to vote against the health care bill, but also to remind everyone there to get down and do their job. Do you know how he felt about kind of the domino effect of Sarah Palin and everything else that came with that?
You know, I'm going to be as transparent as John McCain. I don't know that.
Right.
As I hope I can be as transparent as he is. I don't know about that, but I do know this. John McCain loved the Senate. He loved being there. He was sometimes his severest critic, but he really was not afraid to say, look, guys, we got to do what's right here. And we've got to find a way to work together. He went to his death, and they still had not found that way. I mean, I think the political divide in this country now is probably wider than it was in those days. But it's a different world than the world that John McCain came to when he first ran for the Senate. You know, when he first ran, he was seen out in Arizona by some, especially his critics, as a carpetbagger.
Yes.
He didn't grow up there.
He had only lived there a couple of years, right?
A short time. Yeah. And one of his opponents brought that up, and he said, well, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't lucky enough to be able to grow up in the 1st District of Arizona, this wonderful place. But he said, you know, I was kind of busy with other things during that time. And he said, I went back and checked, and he said, the fact is, the longest I've ever lived in any one place is Hanoi.
Yeah, he was good with the comebacks.
It never came up again.
Yeah, I bet. Before I let you go, favorite memory
of John McCain? Well, there were many. I think riding on his bus in the 2000 campaign, where I first met Norah O'Donnell. And I have many friends in politics and among reporter corps that go back to those days. I loved having him on Face the Nation, but I have to say, I will always remember going out to visit him in May of this year. And really, it wasn't an interview. I mean, I didn't go out there to get any news, and I didn't want any news. I just basically wanted to say goodbye. And I'm really glad I did. I'll never forget those moments.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bob.
Thank you.